The majority voted to kill him. Not a tyrant, not a military tribunal. Just 500 ordinary Athenian citizens, the beating heart of the world's first ever democracy, voted by a margin to execute the very man who had spent his entire life dedicated to asking people to think more carefully. 500 regular citizens versus one of the most influential figures in history, and he still ended up losing. The charge was corrupting the youth and impiety. The real charge, however, was making people uncomfortable, making them sit with questions they would much rather not have asked of them, making them confront, and especially publicly confront, the very things that they most carefully considered their best features when, if you genuinely examined them, it would be their biggest insecurities. Democracy killed Socrates, and Socrates, before it had killed him, had already explained exactly why it would. His argument, Socrates being, was not that freedom was bad, not that people should not have rights or voices or autonomy or the ability to shape the world that they live in every single day. His argument was instead much simpler and much more uncomfortable than that, because it was the fact that most people are not qualified to any extent to make the decisions that democracy asks them to make. His idea of representing it was through a ship. If you knew that you had to cross this ocean, you had to cross it, your life was on the line, it was depending on crossing that very ocean, and you were on this ship with other people, would you hold a vote among the passengers of which direction to go in, and which way the wind is facing, which way to sail the mast? And I don't know shit about boats, but I'm just using a terminology here, right? No, what you would do is you would find the very experienced person, the most experienced person on that boat who knew how to navigate, the person who had studied the stars, knew how to use the tools, and understood the currents and the specific wind and everything that was specifically important to ensure that that boat crosses that ocean. The person with the experience that the situation itself required. You would want expertise, not a consensus. So democracy, as Socrates observed or talked about, does the complete opposite of that. It would take the most consequential decisions a society can make, which is, who leads the country, what laws are governed, what political ideology does the country have to follow, what wars do we go upon, or anything like that. It takes the whole direction in which the thing, the world, the country moves towards, and it hands them to a majority that has never actually asked themselves or been asked whether they're qualified enough to answer the questions. And the majority, by large specifically, has never asked themselves that question themselves either. I think I just said themselves like 6 times. Anyway, what it looks like in practice, however, is the very specific person who votes based on which candidate feels more familiar. The person who chooses their entire position on a complex policy question because the person that they were told to trust told them specifically what to think about that. The person who has such a confident opinion on something about economics or something about foreign policy or something about constitutional law, any of the sort, formed not through any sort of rigorous studying, but instead through the specific news source that confirmed what they thought they believed in. It's all about who has the best PR team. It's all about who has the best policy representation. It's not about the actual facts or the actual study. The person who thinks all of these things matter, the person who listens to this politician over this one because they're more attractive even, that person's vote counts just as much as your vote would, or the person who has spent their entire life, who have spent decades or years set to dedicating their life to studying the exact same questions that you are asked. They're just much more experienced. And your vote, or that person, the hypothetical person's vote, has the exact same sustenance as that qualified person's vote. And that is what Socrates thought about democracy. That is not the accident that the system has. Instead, that is the system itself. Now, Plato, who watched his teacher die at democracy's hands and spent the rest of his entire life trying to understand why, wrote that a democratic society will eventually produce a population that mistakes freedom for the absence of any obligation to think. That the freedom to hold any opinion becomes, over time, the assumption that all opinions are equally valid. But it's just not true. It shouldn't be true. That expertise becomes a suspicious thing instead of a trustable thing, and that the person person who has studied something so much more than anyone around him is treated with the exact same deference as a person who has a feeling about something or who saw a TikTok about it. He was describing the current moment with such uncomfortable accuracy, even though this was explained in 380 BC. Think about how long ago that was, and now, for some reason, it applies even more than it ever did. And none of that is comfortable to sit with because the implication runs directly at you. There is no avoiding it. It's not at the system in the abstract. It's at you specifically as a person. It's at the exact last time that you held a confident position on something that you had not actually studied at all. It was at the last time that you trusted the majority's vote on something, the majority's consensus, simply because of the fact that the majority seemed so certain about it. It was at the exact, specific last time that you confused the volume of a consensus with the validity of it. Now, Socrates' question, the very one that got him killed, was not a political question of any sort. Instead, it was personal. It was a specific, deeply enticing question about oneself. Do you actually know what you think you know? Not in any sort of abstract form. It's about the specific things that you are most confident about. It's about the positions that you would defend so vigorously with your entire life on the line just because you thought you believed in them. It was the beliefs that feel so obviously correct that examining them just seems like a sort of waste of time in a sense. Those are the exact feelings he had an interest in. He had a very specific interest in because he wanted you to be interested in them as well. Those are the exact feelings that need to be examined the most compared to any other feelings. 500 people voted to silence the one specific person who was asking them to think. Just hypothesize with me, right? 500 uneducated, illogical, idiocratic individuals against one of the most influential speakers in all of history. One genuine genius who knew how to speak and how to think and how to formulate thoughts like no other against just a bigger number of fools. Who do you think should win that? Realistically, maybe you'd think it should be the one person, but no, because democracy tells you that the numbers are more important than the actual statistics, than the facts. So the most disturbing part about all of it, the craziest bit about this entire story I've been telling to you right now is not that it only happened in ancient Athens, but instead the fact that it's happening right now. And you knew it would happen again, and you've watched it happen again and again, every 4 years, the political debate is the biggest example of it, but I think it goes down to literally decisions made in your daily life. Day-to-day living is formed by democracy. But anyway, you may have participated in that the huge ideologies or the big political decisions without ever calling them what they actually were. And that is the specific thing Socrates was warning you about. It was not about them, but instead simply warning you about yourself.